Stories that live in the shadows, whispers from beyond, encounters we can't explain. This is Beyond the Veil, where the unknown is never far away.
Hello everybody and welcome to Beyond the Veil. I'm Brett Rogers and I'm with my co-host Lee Wise.
Good evening.
And we're here to share your paranormal encounters and to guide you as we try to uncover and learn what lies beyond. So here we are, Lee, episode 1. And obviously for those listening, we'll just sort of like explain a little bit about how Beyond the Veil came to be. And originally we set this up as, well, we was going to try and investigate places, weren't we?
Yeah, sort of on the back of doing a few of these sort of most haunted evenings.
Yeah.
We got some ideas. We've always been interested in the paranormal.
Yeah.
But then didn't really get anywhere with our own investigations.
No, because no one would let us in.
Approached a few interesting buildings that we've always found slightly creepy.
Well, it's because
but to no avail.
Because where we live, there's a lot of really good history, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a lot of, like, certainly in comparison to a lot of other cities in the UK, we've got a lot of historical buildings, haven't we? And we know that they are haunted, or reported to be haunted.
Yeah.
And we wanted to get in there, didn't we? And it was just like, well, if we sort of set up as a business and we approach these people with like a professional approach rather than just trying to break in, like urban explorers tend to. Not that I've got anything wrong with that, I'm just saying. But that was going to be our approach, wasn't it? And we either didn't get answers at all, or everyone just told us, no, we're not interested.
I think it's one of the interesting things about paranormal in general is that almost everybody you speak to just in conversation is interested in it, especially if you've got any story to tell or experience to share. But nobody wants to be seen to be too interested in it. They're considered prank. Yeah. And I think the people who are in charge of these buildings will have that to contend with, even if they think your idea's interested. They probably won't approve it still.
Well, this is the thing, they've probably got stories themselves. They probably think to themselves, oh god, yeah, well, this place is haunted, but we're not going to let these people in. And I just think that's, I was gutted when we got a couple of responses and they were just like, no, we're not interested.
Yeah.
I was just like, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to, like, damage anything. We're not crazy. But, yeah, I always thought it was a bit disappointing. We never got anywhere. But ultimately, that just shut us down, didn't it, really? I mean, like, it shut us down before we even got started. There was going to be us two, and then a couple of others were going to do it, weren't they? A couple of others in our friendship circle. And it just never took off, and we shut it down. But we... this idea of the podcast was yours. I can't even take credit for it, sadly. But we went away for my birthday, didn't we? And it was this really cool. It was a barn conversion, wasn't it? And it was real old with real old brick and everything, and it had a vibe to it in itself, didn't it? Really, and it was like it was very rural around it. And it was awesome, but then we just decided to tell like scary campfire stories, didn't we? Yeah. And then that's when it was so good, wasn't it? We scared ourselves stupid,
absolutely,
didn't
we?
Yeah.
Went to bed thinking I was going to have a knock on the door from some black-eyed kids.
Yeah, which is a future episode as well.
All sorts of things are going through my mind, and it's nice to get that feeling, because as an adult, you don't get it an awful lot. You might see the odd horror film that scares you, or go to one of these events that we've been to and feel a bit creeped out afterwards. You don't get it a lot, I don't think. No, as an adult.
No. Not just by telling stories. I mean that was the thing. We shared a couple of stories. I mean that story that we are going to share it in an upcoming episode, but that story that Kat told us about that really creeped me out, especially because she didn't originally start telling that story as a paranormal story. It was only like this conversation we're having now probably won't make sense to a lot of our listeners, but it won't make sense to any listeners. But it will make sense, when you hear that episode. But yeah, it was scary, and I think the point is that you don't get scared like that anymore just by talking to each other and telling each other stories. It's hard to, and because people just don't generally do that anymore. But yeah, and that's how this podcast has come to be. But then it was like, well, we need more stories. We've got our own stories, but we've only got so many of them, and we need other people's. So then Beyond the Veil Investigations, which was what it was, then became Beyond the Veil Podcast, which is where we are now. And the whole point of this podcast is that we want to hear your stories. So we want you to share your stories with us, your encounters, and that way we can try and understand what it is that you've experienced. Is it something we can relate to? Are there any other people who have had the same sort of experiences? People might listen to it and go, okay, well, something like that happened to me. They might reach out to us as well. And then, in our limited capacity and our limited way, we'll try and investigate it for you, try and get to the bottom of some of this stuff for you if we can, try and help you understand it a little bit. Is there anything to learn from it? And that's, what we want to try and do. And we just want to try and cover as many topics and stories as possible. But we know full well, having always, like you said a minute ago, we've always had an interest in the paranormal and the supernatural and the unexplained, and I just think that I certainly feel that there's definitely more that goes on in the world beyond that which we take at face value. I believe it lurks in the shadows. It's out of sight in the corners of the world where people won't or daren't look, and there are things that people just don't want to admit is beyond the normal realms of science or what is deemed to be natural. But we're going to look past that. We're here to look into the shadows, and we want to look closer into those corners, and we want to hear and to share your stories. We have our experiences, as I say, things we can't explain, and this would be a good opportunity for us to explain what, who we are in regards to the paranormal. But when we are scientists, we don't call ourselves paranormal investigators. We're just two guys fascinated by the paranormal and the supernatural, and we just want to learn and understand more about it and try and figure out why some things can be explained and why some things can't be. So, I think we've spent a lot of the time over the years trying to find answers to stuff, haven't we? We aren't the type of people who just believe anything, are we?
No, absolutely not. There's a famous, apparently haunted house near us,
yes,
isn't there? And we'd gone and spent some evenings just sort of hanging around it, looking at it.
Yeah.
And I personally got a bad vibe from it.
We all did.
And I didn't feel it was a very nice place. Not that we went inside, but even just from outside, didn't feel it was a very nice place. But then when we spoke to one of the local historians, he basically debunked everything that's said about this house, and it is essentially a moneymaker for the people that own it, passing it off as being haunted and lots of paranormal activity going on in it. And we were wedded to the belief that it was haunted. We were disappointed, maybe. I felt a bit disappointed.
I did.
But I accepted what we were being told by our friend who was in the know. And I think that's important.
Yeah, you can't just go into everything believing it straight away. We've talked about the things that have happened to us, and as time's gone on or whatever, we've actually been able to debunk our own initial theories, haven't we? We aren't the type of people who just go, oh, did you hear that? Yeah, it was probably a ghost. We just aren't like that. It's like, oh, what's that in the sky? Yeah, it's probably a UFO. We're not those types of people. Yeah, we're not cynics either. We're not skeptics. We don't also just instantly believe that, well, until it's absolutely nothing else, that's when it's a ghost. We aren't like that either. We're not the complete other way around. We do take everything into account, and we try and be as, well, for two middle-aged people like us try and be as normal as possible about it, you know. But yeah, I mean, you know, we all have these stories though, and we've all experienced something. I'd say most of us have experienced something or seen something we just can't explain, and something we know to be impossible. We've experienced a feeling or an event so unnatural that it stays with you. And I truly believe that this is what lies beyond the veil. And we are here so you can share your story, a story you maybe felt you couldn't share before, whether that's because you're scared no one will believe you, or you may be worried what people will say or think about you. You know, we understand. With that being said, we have 2 stories today which have been submitted to us, and these are both really extraordinary, and they made my hairs stand on end. I don't know about you, but when I get really freaked out and uncomfortable, and dare I even say it, scared by a story, I get this like weird feeling in my nose, and it actually kind of like brings tears to my eyes when I'm like that scared. And both of these stories did do that to me. I was like, holy shit, this is kind of scary. So we're going to share these stories with you, and after each one, we'll talk a little bit about it, and we'll share our thoughts on and theories over this. Lee does not know anything about these stories. These are new to him, and this will be the format of the podcast, meaning we'll take it in turns on a given subject. We'll take it in turns hosting, and whoever's hosting that particular episode, the other one will be completely flying in the dark with no knowledge of what's coming up. And that is the format, in the sense that we want to be able to have an outside perspective on the show that is going to experience and learn the story as I go along with you, the listeners, and then hopefully that person will be your voice as to the questions to ask about the story, and that's what we want to do here. So, you know, without further ado, are you ready to begin?
I'm looking forward to these. The only thing I know about them is that they freaked you out.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, they did. So, put on your headphones, silence your phone, turn the lights down low or off if you dare, and sink into the dark. Get comfortable. Best way to hear these stories is gathered in the shadows, whispering of things unseen. Let's take a look beyond the veil. Our first story comes from George in Castleford, UK. George emailed us to share a story of something he had experienced. He did say that he had experienced numerous potential paranormal events over the years, and the majority of these had been minor, unexplainable scenarios, the kind of things a lot of us have experienced. But what I am about to tell you had scared and unsettled him the most. A few years ago, George, who lives in an unassuming semi-detached house on a suburb of Castleford, the kind of house you'd drive past 100 times on your way to work, on your way to the shops, and never look or think to look twice at it. And he decided to decorate the living room through the night, which is a bizarre decision, in my opinion, but the reason for this was so he could take the TV down from the wall and be able to decorate it without having to worry about his disabled wife being in the living room, wanting to watch TV and such and such. George was making good progress, having stripped the wallpaper from the walls and bagged the majority of the waste paper up. Now, moving through the living room, putting the wallpaper up, he was happy with how everything was coming together. It was getting late, but George was now determined to get as much done as possible, completed if possible. However, at around 1 a.m, the temperature dropped. The room felt cold, and although he was aware the later it got, the colder it would be, but this was a drastic change and a sharp drop. The room felt unnaturally cold, and George felt uneasy. Looking around and confirming he was alone, he decided to dismiss the uneasy feeling. But all of a sudden, a toy laser gun, which was sat nestled in with a load of other toys, started to make a noise as though the trigger had been pulled. The laser gun, which belonged to one of his grandchildren, was collected with various other toys, and these lived in a corner of the room for when he had his grandchildren around. When he began preparing to decorate and his wife went up to bed, he moved the box of toys into the middle of the room. George, having already experienced some minor paranormal activity in the past, was unnerved by the event, but had his reservations on whether this was truly paranormal or not. After all, this could be a case of it had just moved in the box, and after being moved around, the gun had just been triggered. I must take this moment to explain, when asked, George simply summarised a lot of the previous activity he had experienced in this house were sounds of tapping and knocks, and items being moved from where they once were, and then being found in places they wasn't to start with. Classic activity for anybody that has experienced what could very well be paranormal activity. George did explain that although some of these could be explained away, the house moving, cracking and creaking as the temperature changes, items moving could be a simple case of misremembering where they were left in the first place, but George did say that more substantial activity had happened over the years, and had happened in other places he had lived before, but he did not want to share any more at this time, and respectfully I didn't push. Back to the night of the decorating, however, George said that he had tried to have a bit of fun with the situation, not fully convinced there was anything paranormal to it, but also to ease some of the tension which had settled in case there was. The sound of the gun still sounding, George called out, "Very funny, now pack it in," and suddenly it stopped. George looked around at the room, which had fallen deadly silent. He resumed with his decorating and tried to put it out of mind, trying to apply logic to the situation. That logic being the trigger being pressed accidentally in the box as it moved and it stopping on request, just a sheer coincidence. A little time had passed since the event, and George had come to the corner of the room and the wallpapering was particularly tough here. He was struggling to get it to wrap around and was getting rather frustrated when suddenly the gun sounded once again. George, already frustrated with the difficulty of the task at hand, was now getting annoyed with this gun. George, in his frustration, shouted out, "Stop!" And yet again, right on cue, it did. The eerie silence crept over once again, and everything fell still. This time, the silence was deafening, and George had decided he wasn't interested on whether it was paranormal or coincidence, and simply decided to remove the batteries from the gun. Walking away from the wallpaper half hung on the wall, he pulled the gun from the box and found the battery tab. He clicked it open, when a reality hit hard. There was no batteries in the gun. George had had enough. He placed the gun on the sofa and walked away, and decided to call it a night and go to bed, far too unsettled to be able to continue. In the morning, when he came downstairs after a very unsettled night's sleep, George saw his wife sat in her chair. Before she could speak, he pointed at the gun on the sofa and asked when the last time it had batteries. She said it must have been a good couple of months, as she'd been meaning to get batteries for it for a while, but kept forgetting. Again, George stopped short of divulging any other stories, but did say he would potentially share some more with us in the future. But this was the end of his story. And it's pretty incredible, don't you think?
I like that. Yeah, obviously until we get more listeners, hopefully, and more stories coming in, we are relying on people we know. So we know George, and he's a no-nonsense
Exactly.
the guy. Wouldn't scare easily.
No.
Being freaked out by that enough to share the story is telling in itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's not the kind of guy who, does these things for attention or anything. He's past that. If this scared him, then it scared him.
Yeah.
He's not the kind of guy who's just likes making these things up for drama. So yeah, it's. I think it's. When he told me, I was just like, yeah, I'm done. I'm out.
The interesting thing is when we've been to these ghost hunt evenings, they'll often use toys, won't they? They use the cat balls, and it's interesting. I don't know if it's because it's to do with energy, but it's interesting how sometimes what might be ghosts are attracted to these sorts of things. The other thing is that they're toys. It might be children.
Yeah.
Um,
It's also quite interesting that specifically this this ghost, whatever, it chose to manipulate and interact with a toy that had no batteries as well, almost as if it's like trying to prove a point that it's
Yeah.
there. You know, like as if to truly rule out coincidence. Like George had thought that it was. He was like, I need to get your attention almost.
Yeah.
And the best way I can possibly do this is to manipulate something that there's no way on earth that this could have happened unless there was batteries in. And if there's no batteries in, then you've got to know I'm there.
And especially that it stops on demand.
Yes.
More than once.
Exactly. Now, it's also quite interesting, this one, because it's clearly poltergeist activity, and a poltergeist is categorized as a kind of ghost or spirit. Now, for those unaware of the difference between a ghost or a spirit, do you know the difference between a ghost or a spirit, Lee?
Not unless we're considering spirits as Jack Daniels and Ron Bacardi.
Sadly not. Sadly not. So on that one, I will take your answer as no. So a ghost is categorized as the energy or soul of a human after a person dies. A ghost is usually described as a person's soul who chooses to stay or linger in the mortal world if they have unresolved issues or business. There are countless depictions of this in movies alone to varying degrees of behaviour. Ghosts are sometimes found to be in a state of being stuck. This is where the ghost of the person is confused as to where they are, and this is usually the case if the person has died suddenly. Ghosts are often most associated with being tied to a specific location, and this can be the place in which they lived or died. If a person died in a hospital, for example, their energy, which becomes a ghost, will be tied to a familiar place and will often return to their home. So that's why, I always find it quite interesting that morgues would be seen to be very haunted places, but then I always think, well, the only reason a ghost or a spirit would choose to hang around a morgue is if they don't want to leave their body, because there's not really anything for them to be there, like to keep them there. Can you imagine just sitting in a morgue all day?
I do think that's the sort of thing that's come from movies and books and popular culture, because in the course of my job, I visit on a semi-regular basis and don't find it in the slightest bit eerie in the sense of ghosts. It's eerie because you know what it is.
Yes.
But it's not eerie in terms of hauntings and
supernatural.
And, especially a couple of the mortuaries that I attend are quite modern, so that makes it even less. Very much like a sterile environment, what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the mortuaries I attend are old and they are like something off a movie, but there isn't really anything inherently creepy about them, other than knowing what they're used for and knowing that behind those doors there are
stacks of bodies. Yeah.
So I would imagine the only person that may haunt a mortuary is somebody who works there, probably, or worked there.
I love my job. I want to do it in the afterlife.
That being said, again, I'm sure will come up in further episodes, you lived in an apartment that was where a mortuary used to be.
Oh, yes.
That was terrifying in some ways.
Yes, it was. Then we got some real crazy stuff there. Yeah. That actually scared my mum.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for that episode.
So I think, that you if you were a ghost and you died here at home, you were transported to a mortuary, where's the most likely place you'd hang around?
Yeah.
Not the mortuary.
You won't hang around at the mortuary, would you? It'd be boring. So, so it's likely that, like you just said there, even if they died in hospital, the chances are their ghost will be linked to a location that's familiar, and the ghost of that person will be unable to move on, either unknowingly or out of choice, and will remain within their home or place of death or another key significant area that was linked to that person. This can often lead some ghosts to be confused, some ghosts not even aware that they've died and may be lingering while searching for loved ones. Some investigators who have allegedly communicated with ghosts have claimed ghosts sometimes still see their surroundings the same as when they were last alive, meaning they exist and stuck in some sort of like limbo or purgatory. So a spirit, however, is a little more of a broader term. A spirit is the term used to refer to the energy and non-physical entity of humans, animals, or anything which can have an energy or life force. This is the kind of phenomena people will experience when they've seen ghost trains or ghost ships, because they have a kind of energy that's been built up from when they ran, whether that's kinetic energy or anything like that. Spirits are often more aware of their present state and are believed to possess a higher consciousness or awareness than that of ghosts, and as such it is believed they are able to traverse between the realms of the living and the dead freely. Some also believe they are able to pass through different dimensions, and let's not forget that although not all spirits are human, this can mean some spirits are evil and are from other realms. We are of course referring to these as demons. So, that being said, what is a poltergeist? Well, is it a ghost or a spirit? Well, difficult and not entirely clear on that one, because a poltergeist is referred to as a type of ghost or a phenomenon related to spiritual energy. So getting an answer to this isn't very easy, and it's certainly not helped when we learn that the word poltergeist comes from the German words meaning noisy ghost or rumbling spirit. So again, it can either be either or. I think to get an answer to this, it needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. After all, the activity could be caused by a ghost which is tied to a location, which has chosen to remain there due to unfinished or unresolved business. It may be they are angry and they are manipulating the environment to invoke fear or terror in order to drive the people out of what the ghost may consider to be their home. It could also be because they're actually trying to get the attention of the person for help, to help understand what's happened to them. So if we had to take each instance on a case-by-case basis and try and determine whether this poltergeist activity is attributed to a ghost or a spirit, what's the answer? Well, personally, I think this is attributed to a spirit, most likely that somebody George knows. George had mentioned how he had experienced numerous paranormal events in his life, and they had not just been whilst living in his current home. It is very likely that this activity of a powerful spirit, which has been able to conjure a lot of energy in order to manifest poltergeist activity, it's got to be someone he knows, and it's got to be quite powerful, a very strong connection to be able to manipulate the surroundings like that. As to the intentions of this particular activity, what it meant and why the spirit did it, I don't know. Was it a warning? Was it the spirit's attempt to communicate with George while he was alone and there was no other distractions? If George is listening, this may be something for him to uncover, and hopefully after listening to this he may have a better understanding of what he's dealing with. My advice, if you're willing to do so, see a spiritualist and attempt to contact with that which is with you. It may be a case the spirit would like to communicate with you, and once it does, it can rest. Another suggestion, although this may be an unpopular suggestion, is to get a Ouija board. Classic. And as you know, Lee, I have used numerous Ouija boards and I have found these to be very helpful, and in time I will share my stories on this. But if a spirit is truly trying to reach you, George, a Ouija board may actually help you both.
Maybe. And it's interesting because I would have always been very much against Ouija boards until we started going onto these ghost hunt evenings. When it was first mentioned, I thought, oh no, I'd rather not. And I thought, oh, sod it. But I've been completely different to you in that I've never really got anything from it. To the point where I often don't get involved now, not out of fear, which again probably came from movies.
Yes.
than anything else. But more just out of I don't seem to get an awful lot from it, and I'm absolutely not discrediting your experiences by that, but for whatever reason, spirits don't seem to want to communicate with me via a Ouija board.
You bastard! You got nothing for me! But this is it, isn't it? I mean, and I think everyone's always going to have a different experience using Ouija boards, seeing spiritualists, tarot cards, all these sorts of things. And, you know, I'm not saying you're a disbeliever or whatever, but I do always think it's just about, you know, your mindset and ultimately just what happens. I mean, I've been very lucky that I've had the responses come through that I have. And again, I'll share those in due time. But I've been very fortunate that the interactions I've had on a Ouija board have been, you know, they've been very good. You know, very clear as to who I'm speaking to. So yeah,
yeah, it's I think as well it doesn't help sometimes with these organised nights, as great as they are. We enjoy them and we'll continue to do them. You know, I remember the time we were doing a Ouija. That we had a crunch and somebody was stood observing us eating a bag of crisps.
yeah,
Sort of spoiled it.
yeah. Well, that's it. There's nothing worse than hearing a crunch and you think you're being observed by a ghost, and no, it's just a munching, hungry, spiritual observer, and just not a spiritual observer in the sense of lives on a different plane.
So they were firmly on this.
Yes, definitely, as we observed. So yeah, so that's our first story, Lee. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's creepy, like you said, that the idea that a spirit or a ghost has got enough energy or enough power or whatever it is that allows them to do this, that they can activate something without batteries. I spoke about the cat balls at the haunted evenings. Those have got batteries in them, and we still don't see a lot from those, do we?
No.
So for something to occur with a toy that's got no batteries in, and the ending on demand is a bit weird. That gives me the impression though that it's not a threatening presence.
No.
It didn't seem like it was trying to scare George, because I think if he said stop it, it would have. Or carried on.
Yeah, just carried on. Yeah, it's a good point. That actually,
again, that could point to being a child, maybe into authority. I don't know.
Or it became aware that it was scaring him.
But it's freaky to the point where it's almost a trope, isn't it? You know, something goes off, you check it, and there's no batteries in it. It's a storyline that's been used in popular culture.
Yeah. And that's it. When he told me, I was just like, that is straight up out of a horror movie. That, you know, that is, you know, how many times have we seen that? It's almost cliched, and it's I mean, if it had happened to me, I'd probably cried.
Yeah, I think as you'll come to know about me, as Brett already knows, things that are out of context freak me out the most, more than anything. And I think even though he wasn't doing it for any sinister reason, the fact that he was decorating at the sort of in the early hours just makes it feel a bit weirder.
Yeah, because everything because it's not just what's inside the house. I think that when I think of that story, it's the fact that the house will have been deadly silent because all of the normal day-to-day goings on of the house would have ended.
Yeah.
You know, that there's no activity at all. So there's absolutely nothing. There's no sound of TV, the radio's not on, there's nothing. But it's not just that, it's outside as well. It's the external factor. It's the fact that not only is the house deadly silent, but the outsiders as well, because everyone's in bed.
Yeah,
the world has stopped. And everything... I think I would just kind of feel like the whole world was looking at me at that point. Like everything was just magnified by 100%, 1,000%, because everything had stopped, but the gun was going off. And I think that would have scared me even more in that sense, because it's just like, but everything else, nothing's going on now.
Yeah.
Like, there's no one outside. It's just me and this fucking gun, you know.
And that's a really good point, because somewhere so familiar as your house, in those early hours, it can feel alien, especially if something weird's happening. Anytime something freaked me out, whether that's paranormal or just I don't like that. I immediately want to go to bed. I don't want to be downstairs in the living room or whatever, like you say, without the TV on and there's just you and your thoughts.
Yeah.
And
it just amplifies everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love your response. Right, I'm going to bed.
I do, yeah.
I think that's brilliant. So, okay, so our next story. Okay, get comfy. So our next story is really quite incredible. And this is a story that, when it was told to me, it really made me feel quite unsettled. And I've already shared it to Charlotte, which is my wife. I told her I had to tell somebody, and I told her straight away, and she was just like, I don't like that. So this was submitted to me by a person who has wished to remain anonymous due to the contents of the story. Now, as always, we respect anybody's wish for anonymity surrounding these subjects. We also want to protect people's privacy for those that will still live at this property. So people's names have been changed and the location will not be disclosed of where this story has taken place. So the format of our podcast is we would generally like to investigate in whatever we can the stories which have been shared, but as previously mentioned, we won't be disclosing the location, and we'll discuss whatever we can without giving this away, like as much as I have been able to investigate. But again, I'm going to struggle to give too much away of what I've learned without making it very easy to disclose where this place is with a simple Google search. This story came from James, who told me of a time when he was studying at university. James was not a resident of the city where he was going to study, and he was looking for student accommodation. He was searching high and low with his friend Paul. They came across an old building called Ivy House, which had been turned into apartments. This building was converted out of the remains of a much, much older building, and upon entry, James and Paul immediately took notice of the beautiful tiled floor and the stained glass windows in the entrance hall. Viewing the property, they were in total awe of its old Gothic beauty and the beautiful coloured rays of sunlight beaming through the windows. James learnt that the property wasn't quite ready yet, as the previous tenants had only recently moved out, and it still needed to be redecorated and cleaned before being ready for new tenants. Being something of a businessman already, at such a relatively young age, James worked out a deal with the landlord. He arranged that if both he and Paul decorated the apartment themselves, they'd get a reduced price on the rent. James and his friend were in need of the place somewhat urgently, and working out this deal with the landlord was an ideal solution to their housing problem. The landlord agreed to the deal, but he only had one specific request, and something he was quite adamant about. He wanted a particularly and unusually long tenancy. James was somewhat reluctant, but he ultimately saw no other option than to accept. He also didn't see it to be anything too much of an issue, as both he and his friend were going to be at university for the next couple of years, and this would give them a place to live for the duration of their studies. James and Paul got to work on the apartment, and as previously stated, were enamoured by the beauty of the architecture, not just of the building, but their apartment also. The beautiful ornate tiled floor, which ran through the entrance hall, also ran into the apartment, partially down the entrance hall of their ground floor apartment, number 3. It didn't take long for James and his friend to get settled in, getting into a routine which fit around their university commitments and living in the city they now called home. It also didn't take long for James to notice certain things in the apartment were happening, and these are the kinds of things those who have experienced paranormal phenomena will have experienced, and similar to what we've just discussed in George's story. Things not being where they left them, doors being open which they could have sworn they were formerly closed, or vice versa. But these things were dismissed, After all, James did not live alone. He could have left something somewhere, but his friend Paul could have moved it, and his friend believed the same thing of James. It wasn't entirely beyond the realms of possibility, and they believed that they were both playing pranks on one another and just not admitting to this, simply being potentially forgetful as well. Either way, these small and rather inconsequential happenings did nothing to affect their daily lives, and they had no reason to believe there was anything more behind them, and certainly nothing sinister. It wasn't until one day, when something happened within the apartment, that the unexplained events which took place at Ivy House really began to manifest, and they truly began. What followed was a series of events which has left an impression on James to this day, and something he has shared with nobody outside of his family. One day, James and his friend returned home from the local shop with their food for the coming week. James and Paul each had a cupboard in the kitchen for their respective groceries. Placing his bag on the kitchen counter, he opened the cupboard to a bizarre sight. He chuckled and looked at Paul, who had not registered James's disbelief and laughter. Paul, focusing on putting his groceries away, opened the door and was also taken aback by what he saw. Both James and Paul found their canned food stacked in triangles. James laughed once more and naturally blamed Paul for playing such a stupid prank on him. But James then realised that Paul was also confused, questioning James what he was talking about. James looked inside Paul's cupboard to only see the same thing. Cans stacked in triangles. James and Paul once again shrugged this off, blaming each other for a bizarre prank, and neither of which were owning up and taking responsibility. After some time going backwards and forwards, and nobody relenting, both James and Paul moved on from the event. It didn't take long until the pair were faced with something which took this supposed, seemingly harmless prank and elevated it into the realms of terrifying. James laid in bed, sleeping, until he woke up to a feeling he had not had before. Something was telling him something was out of place, and within moments he heard a loud slap on the tile floor outside. So the tile floor, remember, covered the hall outside in the entrance hall of the apartment, and it ran along where his bedroom was. The slap was followed by a dragging sound. There was then another slap, followed by a dragging sound. Then another slap, and the dragging sound. Slap, drag, slap, drag, till it stopped. He heard a door open slowly, a door he recognised to be the bathroom door. He then heard the toilet lid being rattled, as if somebody was lifting it slightly before dropping it again, and again, and again in quick succession. After a few moments of this, it abruptly stopped. You could only hear the sound of the slapping and the dragging sounds once again, until it stopped, and a few moments later, he heard a door at the other end of the hall open, and then close. James, unnerved, chalked this up to Paul, thinking maybe he came in late from going out, or that he'd been to the toilet and was just being ignorantly loud. Either way, when the morning came, James and Paul finally saw one another as they prepared to leave for university. James, frustrated, gave Paul a look, which Paul did the same. Paul was the first to speak and asked, "Did you want to make any more noise last night?" James, shocked, replied, "You've got some nerve after the noise you made." The pair went back and forth, blaming one another once again, not relenting to the notion that neither were to blame for the noise, continuing to blame one another until the matter was eventually dropped once again. Bizarre events continued to transpire. The pair began to hear other sounds, the sound of doors opening and closing, footsteps in the hall of the apartment. James and Paul had continued to dismiss the vast majority of the events, as mentioned earlier, chalking many of these up to not really truly remembering if they'd left items where they had thought they'd found them or left them, and they would just move them. The sound of doors being that of neighbours instead of the ones that they were hearing in their apartment. And besides, they could just be coming from anywhere. They shared an apartment building with many others. These events persisted until one time James had come down with the flu and was very unwell. James and Paul had intended to go out for a night of drinking in the city centre with some friends who had moved into apartment number 1, which was located across the way from their apartment. But as he was feeling so unwell, James insisted his friends enjoy their night and he would stay home and likely soak in the bath in an attempt to feel a little more human. The night grew late and James was home alone. After spending the majority of the night on the sofa, simply watching TV and drifting in and out of sleep, he decided he would finally go and get that bath he had promised himself. It was now around midnight, and James stepped into a warm bath, laid down, hoping to relax and perhaps sweat out some of the illness. As he settled and was comfortable, he then heard music. James laid still, and being aware of the time, had realised the music must be coming from his friend's apartment in apartment 1, as they must have returned from their night out and gone back to apartment 1 to continue their night, and chose not to return to James's, and, with him being unwell, they probably thought, well, they just didn't want to disturb him. As James laid there, listening to the music, somewhat enjoying it, it then began to dawn on him that this music was maybe a little louder and a little clearer than it would be if it was indeed coming from his friend's apartment. James, getting out of the bath, wrapped himself in a towel and stepped into the hall to realise his bedroom door was open and a light was coming from it. James cautiously stepped towards his bedroom. It was clear the music was coming from his bedroom. Stepping into the room, his TV was on, but was on no particular channel, with nothing but white static flickering on the screen. But James was able to see that every part of his sound system was also turned on, fully lit up, and music being played out at a volume louder than he had recently played it. And just to be clear, to remind you, James was on the sofa watching TV, not in his bedroom, and James explained to me that his TV and sound system had been off for some time. James was beginning to become very uneasy about the property, really starting to feel as though he could not ignore what was happening, and this was not a simple matter of he and Paul unable to keep track of each other's comings and goings, or either of them pranking one another. During the time James had lived there, he and Paul had befriended an elderly lady who lived in the property by the name of Audrey. James and Paul would often check in on Audrey, and if they were going down to the local shop, would ask Audrey if she needed anything getting. Some days after the event, with the music in his apartment, James was planning on heading to the shop, so he decided to go and see if Audrey needed anything. James knocked on Audrey's door, asked if she needed any groceries from the shop, when James had this urge to ask a question. Now, before I tell you the question, although I have no doubt all of you will know what that question is going to be, I should tell you that Audrey had previously lived in apartment 1, and that was the apartment where his friends have moved in, if you remember rightly. And since then, Audrey now lived in a newer part of the building, and she'd lived there for some time. So, James, knowing this, asked Audrey if she had ever experienced anything unusual while living in apartment 1. Stood in the doorway of her apartment, Audrey smiled at James and immediately knew what James was talking about. James got the feeling just by the look she gave him, she had been waiting for the question to be asked for some time. "Are you talking about the unpaying tenants that live there?" Audrey asked. James, in somewhat disbelief, didn't really know how to respond and could only half ask different questions, such as, "What do you mean? What's going on?" Audrey invited James into her apartment and told him she would share a story. James sat as Audrey went on to explain that although she had previously lived in apartment 1, a tenant previous to that was formerly a pilot who had lived there, and sadly he had lost one of his legs, and he had been a tenant for some time, and by all accounts he died there. When Audrey moved into apartment 1, it did not take long before things started to happen. things began much the same as they did with James. Things being out of place, items not being where they'd been left, doors being open or closed when they hadn't been left that way. Audrey then shared a story that one night she had awoken from a deep sleep, when at the foot of her bed she saw a nun holding onto rosary beads, seemingly praying. Audrey closed her eyes, asking and pleading to be left alone. When she opened her eyes, the nun was gone. Another instance was that of a monk stood in the hall of the apartment, which disappeared as it entered one of the bedrooms. Audrey went on to explain that the events she went on to experience were so intense, she had to take a break from work and went under various psychological testing to understand what she was seeing and hearing, as she truly believed she was going insane. Things finally began to improve for Audrey when she took the opportunity to move into a newer apartment which had been built as part of an extension to the older part of the building. When she did, the activity stopped, and Audrey was able to get her sanity and her life back together. And eventually, everything seemed to go back to normal. Since living in a new apartment, she did say that although things had more or less gone back to normal, she did have minor paranormal occurrences, but there was certainly nothing in comparison to what she had experienced in apartment 1. Audrey had explained that part of Ivy House was renovated into apartments from the structure which had been there previous, which was in fact a monastery. Things began to fall into place for James, as there was a huge graveyard still neighbouring the grounds of Ivy House. Starting as a monastery, Ivy House then became a nunnery, and in later years the building was used as a children's hospital and a poorhouse before eventually being abandoned. Although not usually a believer of such things, James told Paul of this, and they soon realised this was something they had to come to terms with, and what they had experienced was very real and not their imaginations, nor were they playing pranks on one another. Although things had fallen quiet in regards to paranormal activity for James and Paul, this soon became a problem for their friends living in apartment 1. Their friends came to them to say that they had noticed strange things happening in their apartment. These consisted of things being out of place and hearing noises they couldn't explain. One of the friends shared a story that they were beginning to experience night terrors, something they had never experienced before. One night, one of the friends had had a nightmare, and when they woke up, they saw a nun stood in their room. When they closed their eyes in fright and opened them again, the nun was gone. This account was particularly interesting and eerie, given how the information James had learned from Audrey he hadn't shared with anyone other than Paul, and he certainly hadn't shared it with his friends living in apartment 1. This would also prove to be quite sensational given how some neighbours who had moved into the apartment above James. One day, James was sitting in the living room when he heard screaming coming from upstairs. James left the apartment to see his neighbour from upstairs, stood in the stairwell screaming, and she told James that as she was leaving for work, she'd seen a child in rags run up the stairs and run into her apartment, down the hall and into one of the bedrooms. She had searched the apartment for the child, presuming it was just a playful child of a neighbour, but she became terrified when she realised he was nowhere to be found and there was nobody there. James looked around the apartment, but also found nothing. These neighbours were so shaken by this experience, and by further similar activity that had begun to transpire, that they actually moved out. They had only been there a matter of months, and were moving out long before their tenancy would expire. James never saw them again. James recounted how he would regularly hear movements from the apartment above whilst these neighbours lived there, but would dismiss it just as the neighbours being noisy. But he did say he often wonders, even to this day, if what he was hearing was something other than the tenants in that apartment. James then tried to do some digging into the house, and said he had actually found a book on the history of the building. However, he was unable to remember the name of this book, with it being roughly 30 years ago that he lived there, and He has since tried to find it on numerous occasions, but has had no success. James learned in the book there was a number of tunnels which ran under the former monastery, as was the case with many churches and monasteries during those times, particularly with the revolts against the Catholics. The reality of this really hit hard when one day James and Paul were pulling up a floor in one of the bedrooms to replace it, and they found a small square wooden hatch in the concrete floor. Intrigued, they opened the hatch to find a stone, narrow, steep spiral staircase leading down into the unknown. Steeling themselves, James and Paul stepped down into the dark to find a huge room with archways dotted around each wall, each archway blocked up with modern red brick. The room had large, rectangular stone tablets in the middle, which made the area feel unnatural and foreboding. Deciding they had seen enough, James and Paul left and sealed the staircase back up before laying the new floor over it. This is where James said the activity really began to intensify, and he was not comfortable to talk about it any further. Such is the effect living in this property has had on him. James concluded with one final story, however, which he said he knows sounds ridiculous, almost funny, but he has no explanation for it, and he found it to be extremely strange. James from time to time had a girlfriend staying with him, and during a period of time living there, James had got a cat. One night, James had been working late, and he returned home to Ivy House at around 8:45 in the evening. He was on the phone to his mum as he walked down the path, and he saw his cat sitting at the door to Ivy House, but he chuckled as the light caught the cat in such a way it looked as though he was glowing, almost as if he was a Force ghost from Star Wars, James likened it. He hung up the phone to his mum and opened the door to allow the cat inside, but instead the cat looked at him and looked inside before turning back to him, and then turning his attention back to the street. James figured he just wasn't ready to come back in yet, although it was rather strange given the time. Nevertheless, James went inside and entered apartment 3. He told his girlfriend how he'd seen the cat outside, but wouldn't come in. His girlfriend said that he'd been calling for him since about 4 p.m, but he hadn't come home. James insisted that he'd just seen him, and when he returned outside, the cat was nowhere to be seen. Taking a small walk down the path, he reached the road and decided to take a walk a little further to see if he could see him anywhere, despite being tired and wanting just to get showered and have a rest after a long day at work. James soon found something he didn't want to see. It was his cat, sat by the edge of the road where sadly a car had struck him. Broken-hearted, he returned home and gave the news to his girlfriend, before heading back out and walking down to a local police station, which was thankfully close by. He told the officer at the desk that his cat had been struck by a car, and would somebody be able to go out to collect him, to be able to put him to rest. The officer apologised that somebody had not been out earlier, but they had been short on officers, and they did not have available officers to collect the cat at that time. James explained that this had just happened, and he must be thinking of somebody else. The officer gave the description of the cat, and the name of the road where the cat was, and this indeed matched the description of James' cat, and the location. But James insisted this must be some kind of mix-up, and reiterated this had literally just happened. Because as you remember, James just saw his cat, and after going inside his apartment and then back out, the poor cat was laying in the road. The officer again explained that somebody had reported the cat had been struck by a car and had been in to report the cat at around 6:30 that night. James realised this must have been his cat, and I think we all know what this means for the cat he saw on the doorstep of Ivy House. Although respecting James not wishing to divulge any more, I did ask if his girlfriend had experienced any paranormal phenomena while living in there with him, and although he reiterated he wouldn't feel comfortable discussing any real specifics due to the disturbing nature of these encounters, he explained that his girlfriend, although not being told anything by James as he feared it would scare her away, had mentioned on several occasions not feeling comfortable in the house when alone. She said on numerous occasions when getting out of the bath or the shower, she felt as though somebody was stood in the doorway watching her, and she hated crossing that threshold from the bathroom and into the hall, as though she was actually walking through someone or something. But I think we can agree that these accounts are truly shocking, and James made no reservations in saying that living in Ivy House has had a serious impact on him ever since. He started this entire story by explaining that his time living there, if he was being honest with himself and me, had left him with PTSD, and where some people encountering the unknown and those experiencing paranormal activity will lead some people to seek it out further, wanting answers to their experiences. James could not want anything but the opposite. James insisted he never wanted to come close to experiencing anything similar to what he had while living in Ivy House, and he saw our podcast as an opportunity to share his story in anonymity, where he had only shared this story with his direct family before. James said in all the time he lived there, he had never felt like it was his home. Looking back, he explained the house had always felt like it belonged to somebody else, and he was more like a guest in somebody else's home. He explained how the atmosphere constantly felt oppressive and the air was thick with tension and unease. I think most people who have lived or been to places which have a reputation for being haunted will recognise this feeling, and it is very typical people experience or express these kinds of feelings and energies in places that have paranormal activity, where the history is generally bad or negative. Now, when trying to research this area in which Ivy House is located, I wasn't able to find any particular or specific history that a monastery once sat on the location of Ivy House. However, the area does have a rich history of being tied to a famous nearby abbey, and the monks established much of the land for farming, and indeed a chapel was erected in the area. This was, however, torn down sometime in the 18th century. But this certainly could explain the ghostly sightings of monks and nuns, as this entire area would have seen a population of monks and nuns in its time. Now, it's also difficult to say whether this was where the aforementioned chapel once stood, but if James's story is to be believed, the discovery of the underground tunnels could suggest this is the location of a former chapel, and the tunnels may have ran to the abbey. The two areas there of the former abbey and the location of Ivy House, the two areas are roughly an hour and 30 minutes away from one another, so could be possible. Don't know, maybe. Something to note is the location of the cemetery. Now, when doing my research on that, it would appear the cemetery was opened in 1909, and it was to cope with the growing population within the area, and it was also designed to be in reach of a nearby church, but that church was founded in the year 1240, so that church is certainly old. But according to Audrey, Ivy House had also said that the site was a children's hospital and a poorhouse, but records of this are extremely difficult to locate using the internet, and will most likely need me to do a more extensive dive into the local history by visiting the city. It's just there's just too much history in the area that a simple Google search just isn't precise enough. The area Ivy House sits went through a massive regeneration over the last 100 years, and many of the older buildings have been knocked down to make room for the new. This has made it difficult to find anything without having more information to start with, although my searches have shown that a children's hospital once stood in the area. This was shut down and its operations were moved to the hospital which stands today. It has been very difficult to determine whether this former building once stood and where it once stood. Again, the information's just too sparse. So this is a subject I'd like to revisit in a future episode. There's definitely more to uncover here, and although I don't disbelieve James, on the contrary, I believe everything he told me, Nobody shares a story in as graphic a detail and wishes to remain anonymous unless there is truth here. James could have shared this story a long time ago if he was after attention or fanfare, but he wishes to distance himself from these events, but does also wish for people to know that sometimes there is more than meets the eye. What's your thoughts on that?
The thing that really strikes me is the fact that Audrey and James were, I think it's fair to say, severely psychologically affected by whatever was going on in this building. One person being psychologically affected, you can put down to their psychological makeup. I think two people to be affected. Usually these stories, part of the reason they're fun is because they become almost campfire stories.
Yeah.
And you can sit around and you get the entertainment from them. And usually the person who's telling the stories is just as entertained, even though they were maybe terrified at the time. They don't usually carry that with them.
Yeah.
And for James to be so effective just tells you how powerful the story is. And it just seemed to go on, didn't it? Every time I thought you were going to finish the story and it would have still have been an incredible story, there was more to it.
Yeah.
And then that really finished it off for me was the underground bit. I think tunnels are inherently scary. They're mysterious. I don't know why they're there, what they were used for. But to find one under the place you live, I think is really creepy.
Yeah.
And who bricks them up? Why? Those archways, why? Yeah, the whole thing is just scary. What the hell was that noise?
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, the slap and the drag.
But then the story about the cat was almost nice.
Yeah.
So did this place was the veil thinner in this place, and that's why that happened. And just some of the other stuff seemed a bit more negative.
Yeah.
You would never push the guy to tell you more, but it does make you wonder what on earth the experience that he's not told us about.
Well, that's it. I mean, for him to say that so many more things happened after that, I mean, they were really just sort of the stories that were quite profound that he told me, but he said many other things happened other than that.
Yeah.
And the fact that more things happened after they'd been in the tunnels, but he wasn't comfortable sharing. Well, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
And that's what I want to know.
Yeah, definitely. It's really intriguing and probably terrifying. I think as well, immediately from the beginning of the story, with the landlord wanting an extended tenancy, just suggests immediately that other people have experienced things. So it'd be fascinating to see.
Yeah,
I know you've tried to do a bit of research into that, if anything comes of it, and other people have had experiences that we then find out about. I think from my limited experience with ghost hunts or the paranormal, it does seem almost sometimes that when you notice something, it escalates and it gets stronger.
Yeah.
If you remember when we were at Thorn Lake House, our friends in particular, what are those things called where it
Spirit box
scans the radio station?
Spirit box, yeah.
Yeah, if you remember, one of our friends got really scared. We were up in an attic and we had a spirit box, and it started off fairly mild, saying odd words. She got very freaked out, and just before she had to leave, I felt that we were on the edge of something sort of big happening, because the thing started to get almost more aggressive, and I think at one point it sort of said effing bitch, and it started to just get worse and worse, and it was almost because somebody was scared and it was like it was feeding off that energy. And that sounds a little bit like maybe what happened here at Ivy House.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's funny you should say that, actually, because when I was when I was putting this episode together, and I was trying to think about, like, well, what are we dealing with here? What is this? And I think with George's story, it was like, well, ghost or spirit. Well, we kind of were able to have a bit more of a idea of what we were dealing with there. But then here it's like, well, we're dealing with ghosts because it's the tied to that area. But I think for me, it's like, well, but why? Why is it that, like you said, why is it that there the veil's thinner? Why is it that there the ghosts almost just seem to want to stay? But also, potentially, why is it that more ghosts are drawn to it? Because his cat that got got struck by a car. James believes he saw the ghost of the cat literally hours after it had been struck by a car, and it was there. It was like it was already there and appeared as a fully formed apparition. But that was, so soon.
Yeah,
and James didn't even know that.
And seeing it as a whole, want a ghost cat floating around, same as the little boy that ran into the apartment. We always imagine ghosts and spirits as
almost vaporous,
almost transparent, floating about the place.
Yeah.
Whereas it's scarier still, I think, to think that they're almost fully formed physical entities that look like living, normal.
You could just
being.
you could swear to God that person was right there.
Yeah.
They made all the noises that someone would make walking through a room.
Yeah.
And footsteps and all, and I think that's it. So I was thinking about that concept that a place can sort of become so entrenched in spiritual energy that not only can a place hold many ghosts and or spirits, but it sort of attracts more as well. And the activity tends to thrive on negative energy and the negative energy of those living there. So anyone who's seen the Conjuring films will have heard of the whole 3 stages of demonic possession. Now, those being infestation, oppression, and possession. Now, the Conjuring films are largely a load of crap, but, they are just nothing more than a set of overly fantastic films designed to get some cheap jump scares. But the whole 3 stages of possession are based on real concepts by actual exorcists, and not just the cheap knockoffs that are the Warrens. But however, the most commonly known iteration of the stages is likely those from the Conjuring films. That's how most people will probably know them. So, and I think that those 3 stages kind of line up with what is happening or what has happened at Ivy House. Because if you think about it, like, it started with infestation. Now, infestation is described as the knocking, the creaking, things being out of place, doors being opened or closed, which weren't, just the normal sort of day-to-day stuff where it's enough to get your attention, but you could dismiss it. And then the next stage is oppression. Now, this is where the activity ramps up, and this is where things start to really happen, and it can't be as easily explained away. And it's not as easily explained away as like, oh, well, I must be forgetting I moved that, or oh, I must have left that door open, or I left it closed, or whatever. The stage is designed, in the case of demonic possession at least, to break down the person's willpower, their mental health, to the point of submission. They lose their grip on reality, and they feel like this is, well, because it normally is, but they feel like that it's only happening to them, and a lot of the time it is. But with Ivy House, it seemed like it was happening to a lot of people, but they probably didn't realise that it was happening to other people. So now the next stage, which doesn't really apply in this one because the 3rd stage is possession, but with possession, the person's will and mental walls have been totally broken down, and in the person's weakness and weakened state, they either invite the demon in or the demon is able to easily possess the person. Now, again, the 3rd stage possession. It's meant more for demonic possessions, but it doesn't really apply in this case. But but I think in this sense, it's more like subjugation, because it's to keep people in such a dark place mentally. Like the ghosts and even Ivy House itself is like fueled by the negative energy, and it kind of like allows the ghost to become more active, and they appear more regularly, and the activity becomes more and more. Well, it's just more active, you know. It's like not just little things; it becomes big things, and it's always described that the greater the energy, the bigger the activity. And you know, when we do those little sort of like ghost hunt things that we do, or anything that we've experienced ourselves, it's always about getting the energy going, because once you get the energy going, more things happen, which is what we were just saying about earlier. So, you know, like George with his poltergeists are seen to be very powerful ghosts or spirits, and this is because the sheer amount of energy needed for spiritual entities to behave and interact in that way, you know, with the physical living world. It's believed that you need an enormous amount of energy to be able to do that. So the idea of a place being a conduit, or almost being an entity in itself, it's not a new concept, and we've seen plenty of examples of it in pop culture, just like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Anybody who's read the book or seen the film will know that the Overlook Hotel isn't so much a haunted hotel, but it's more of an entity in itself.
Yeah.
Which houses negative spiritual energy, and it wants more. Places which are said to have been sites for occult activity are obviously rich for this kind of energy, and there's numerous locations all over the world which are reportedly explained as conduits or vessels for this kind of energy. Places of intense pain, suffering, and sorrow are also well known for retaining these kinds of energies and negative energies. And although I won't go into all of the examples, one is the La Laurie Mansion in New Orleans. Have you ever heard of that?
So was that some sort of really evil serial?
Yeah.
Yes. Torturing and killing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have.
That's the one. Yeah. So in the 1830s, a slave set fire to the mansion, the La Laurie Mansion, in an attempt to end their own life and escape potential punishment by Delphine La Laurie, the master of the house, who would torture, mutilate, and murdered a number of her slaves. Although the original La Laurie mansion didn't survive the fire, it is said the mansion which was erected in its place houses the ghosts and spirits of the slaves which died at the hands of La Laurie. Those which have gone on to live in this mansion reported a series of unfortunate events befell them after taking ownership and living in the mansion, such as the death of loved ones and the loss of, you know, possessions and things like that. But perhaps the most famous instance of this is the actor Nicolas Cage. He bought the mansion where the La Laurie mansion once stood, and after he did, he faced serious financial issues, financial ruin even, after buying the property. So could Ivy House be another instance of this property where the negative energies like just sort of linger there, and that it sort of like wants more and it sort of thrives on those energies? It's a concept we will explore in a future episode, because we do actually have an account from somebody where they believe they lived in a place like that. So something we definitely want to sort of discuss, and if anyone else who's listening to this believes that they've lived in a similar sort of place, or they've been to a place, or they know a place, then by all means reach out to us. You know, we want to hear your stories, we want to hear your theories, because you know it's fascinating. But so there we go. Like, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think again the escalating thing. I mean, it seems so much happened in that story. It seems like it was another story when you were saying about the tins being stacked to the triangular shapes. That almost hints at a cult thing.
Yeah.
I've often found it weird that you hear a lot of accounts of ghosts or presences or whatever you want to call it, that are, let's say, religious nuns, because presumably they're the good people amongst us.
Yeah.
So why, want to appear in the afterlife to frighten you?
Yeah, I always found that weird about the house in Castleford, funnily enough. East Drive.
Yes.
You know, that there's this
Yeah, the
evil,
monk.
the evil monk that's there. I mean, apparently, I think he was he hung?
Yeah, that's how the story goes, yeah. The Black Monk of Pontefract.
Yeah, and apparently he's evil. But I always find that strange. I mean, I know that not everyone of the cloth is a nice person, as we know in this day and age, unfortunately. But I always find it quite funny that these, like you just said, religious significant figures such as nuns and monks are quite common.
Yeah.
For hauntings.
And then I thought about it a different way when I was thinking about Ivy House while you were telling the story, because the people who saw the nun, she had, in one of the accounts, she had some rosary beads praying. Maybe she is good. We've got no reason to believe the cat was evil in any way or negative.
I hope not.
That cat was seen.
Yeah.
People are seeing the nun. Maybe the nun was there for some sort of protection. Maybe she was looking out for these people and they happened to see it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean,
Which,
and also
in a sinister way means if that's true, if that's the case, then there is something much more sinister presence there that the nun is trying to help and protect the person from.
Feels like they've got to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, you think that Audrey had said, like, go away, leave me alone, or whatever it was that she said. And she opened her eyes and it was gone.
Yeah.
And when James's friend, heard the story of their friend who screamed, and then they opened their eyes and the nun was gone. It's almost like the nun knew she was scaring her, and then she left. So it does make you wonder, like you said, was she there? Was this nun there for a good purpose?
Yeah,
not just to scare the dickens out of someone.
And then with the person experiencing the night terrors, that's creepy as well to me. As you know, Brett, I have really incredibly vivid dreams, all sorts of
yeah.
Ranging from funny to really scary. I do believe that there is a bit of a link with dreams and what's beyond the veil. I think sometimes it's a way of communicating. Not always, of course, not every dream can possibly be anything to do with anything paranormal, but I do think when you're in that sleeping state, you are in a different state. And whether that means, people have body experiences, astral projection, all of the rest of it, maybe your consciousness is different when you're asleep. Well, it is different when you're asleep, and maybe that makes the veil thinner as well.
Yeah.
So for somebody to be having night terrors, it's not like a beloved long lost relative or pet is coming see you in the dreams. It's something that's causing you to have night terrors.
Yeah.
That's a negative. Which is
yeah, I agree. And again, got stories we can share about that as well, like that concept, definitely. From my own experience, definitely. So that's something else we can cross somewhere down the road. But in the meantime, listeners, what do you think to these stories? Don't forget you can reach out to us on Facebook and Instagram. You can let us know of your thoughts on this. You can search for us on Instagram. It's at beyond.the.veil.podcast. And we'd love to hear your thoughts about these. And, of course, we would love to hear any of your stories as well. So, again, if I can't give away where Ivy House is, but, if you've lived there and you think you're hearing these stories and you're like, I think I've lived at that place, get in touch with us. We'd love to know what you've experienced, and what you've, maybe you didn't experience anything. If you want to experience anything, I'd like to hear that as well, to be quite honest. We don't want to just only hear from you if you've experienced something paranormal. You could just turn around and go, well, in all the time I was there, nothing ever happened. If you know something about the building, If you know the type of building I'm talking about, and you're thinking, if you want to get in touch with us and say, is it this? I'll depending, we'll have a discussion. But if you've got any history about the place that could be useful to us, by all means, reach out to us, and we'll see what we can do for each other.
It'd be interesting to try and locate this book.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, James actually did reach out a second time, and he said that he had done everything he could since originally reaching out to me to try and find this book, and he couldn't find it. But it could be that it's simply out of print, and a book like that, why would it get reprinted? I mean, it's so specific.
Show some local history.
I think that's the road we've got to go down, is try and get some local historian to help us out on this. But yeah, we'll have to see what we can do. But yeah, and in the meantime, we'll hopefully come back to this somewhere. But yeah, let's hear from you guys if you've got any other stories. But we'll cover everything from the paranormal, the supernatural, the unexplained, extraterrestrial, folklore. If you've had anything you can't explain, we want to hear from you. You can share it just as James did, anonymously. We'll protect your identity if you'd really rather not share that. And we're absolutely totally respectful for some people. Like we said at the start of the show, like, we understand why some people don't want to share these stories, either because they've had an effect on them or because they're worried what other people will think of them. We know sometimes these kind of stories do put people in a negative light, or they garner a lot of negative attention. But please don't let that discourage you from sharing your story with us. We want to uncover the truth together with you, and we'll respect your privacy if you'd like to remain anonymous. So, but in the meantime, we both really want to thank you for listening to this first episode of the podcast. We can't wait to do more and share more incredible stories with you. And from Lee, of course.
Thank you, Alice. I would just add, even if the story's a short story, that's absolutely fine. We can lump these together.
Yep.
Even if they're short stories, we'd be really interested in hearing them. And certainly, I hope you agree, but I think doing this tonight has got the vibe that it has felt like a little cottage sharing stories.
100%.
And I'll probably go immediately to bed.
No, I'll probably stay awake for a bit.
Text me.
I'm going to go watch My Little Pony and try and get these horrid stories out of my head. So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter if it's only a short story. Although we might just hold on to your story until we've got a few that we can share in one episode. We'll always be respectful of any story we share. It doesn't have to be super fantastic. Even if it's just something you've experienced, but you just simply cannot explain it, and you really are just desperate to share it with somebody, share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. We really would. But yeah. So in the meantime, we're going to say goodbye. So from Lee and from myself, good night, goodbye, and remember, the truth is hidden and the stories are only beginning. The veil is thin. Have you crossed it? Join us next time. Beyond the Veil.